So what have you been doing?
Hanging out with you, man. What do I do every week? Every day. There's a Nine Inch Nails song called "Every Day Is Exactly the Same." Sometimes I hum it to myself as I'm walking up the stairs because I know Ryan's going to be there waiting for me. Every day is exactly the same. Okay.
So
what have I been working on? No, I'm excited.
The email course. Have you seen the page?
I haven't looked at it yet, actually.
Okay.
I'm super excited for that.
That's what's that's what's blocking you from signing up from our email course.
That's true. I know it's my fault.
I haven't written tests for it.
We should write tests for it.
Yeah. I'm waiting to see how much it changes.
It changes. The reason is because of these lovely blue columns here in our to-do board every week. And we got to get 2 videos out every week. And sometimes that involves some exploratory research. So I've been on some rabbit holes, definitely rabbit trails last few days. One of those we talked about 2 weeks ago. It was the nested dropdown list. And we resolved that this week, didn't we?
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
We felt really clever. We were like patting ourselves on the back. We could talk about this for hours. We won't bore you.
I know. I like the solution that we came up with.
The solution we came up with was really good, but trying to think about. So just to rephrase quickly, the problem is you have infinite nested dropdown. So you've got a list and you have a list has many items, and then an item can render a sublist. But there's a recursion here. So you want item.list, the contextual sublist that it's rendering, to just be another list. So you really are only working with 2 components, but they can be nested. The tricky part is not just rendering them, it's the state involved, right? So the goal here is to be able to make something like a hover menu that you hover and stuff. So there's a path through this list. So if you had every list item and every sublist and every sublist item, et cetera, rendered at the same time, you would just see a giant tree.
Mm-hmm. You can imagine you mouse over, one of the edges, one of the leaves of that tree, and then you just would expect like the path from the leaf up to the root to just highlight. Each one of those became active.
Exactly. So how do you model that? And we, I think 2 episodes ago we talked about like you could have like a state bucket at the root that has like an array of all these things. You could like have the entire tree in an object and have like is active on the ones that are active or something like that. We were talking about how the actual tree of components itself is a data structure, and actually turns out to be a very good data structure for this case. And so we tried a few things. We tried like a recursive data down actions up pattern, where for any given list and its items, if you hover an item, it tells the list that, hey, I'm the active item, or I just got hovered. The list would say, okay, I'm going to set my active item to A2. I'm A. I'm going to say A2 is now active. And then I'm going to pass down the active item to A1, A2, and A3. And each of those are going to know, hey, I have a computed property. I'm active if I'm the active item that I was told. So you do that with list A, and then A2 renders a sublist B, and then B has B1, B2, and B3. So if you hover B3, B now says active item is B3, but then B can tell A2 that I have an active item.
Well, I just got hovered.
Or I just got hovered.
And so then A can say that B2 just got hovered, and they can data down B2, and B2 can say like,
it's actually A2. A2 is the item that renders a sublist, and now A2 can basically send the same message up to A, the list, that it was as if you had hovered me. I'm active now.
Right. And then you can imagine this series of just, I tell my parent that I just got hovered, parent sets some state, data downs it. You can just imagine that going on just infinitely. Right. Just all these lists, they're all just doing that. They're all calling.
And basically there's 2 ways to do it, right? You either hover an item, or a list tells an item, hey, I just got hovered. Mm-hmm. Or I just became activated, really, is where the recursion comes in. So we tried this, and we ran into some issues. I'm trying to remember exactly what happened, but basically it was tricky.
I think there was an issue when you're on a sublist and you go from item 1 to item 2.
So it became tricky once we introduced the timing. when everything is sync, there's actually many ways to tackle this problem, and many of them are pretty satisfactory. But the whole point also of this is to introduce this nice delay where you hover C3, it highlights the path. So A1 and B3 and C3 is the path. Now I mouse off of C3, and there's a concurrency task that's going to wait half a second. And that's like, you don't want to punish the user if they kind of like miss the outline. And after a half a second, then you clear it. You send in an action that's like mouse leave or something, and then the parents are able to clear. What if you do a thing where, this is the thing, every list has its active state, right? So it's a recursive thing. Every list has local state of what active item what was my active item. Let's say you go from C3 and you go straight to A1. And this is while C3, B3, and A3 are still an active path. Now you hover A1. So now, conceptually looking at the entire tree, what's the active path? Let's just say it just is A1. A1 has no children. So the problem is the list A and the sublist B and the sublist C all have active items. How do you let them know that they've been cleared, basically, that there's no more active items?
There needs to be some did receive adders on A3 that says, oh, I was active, I'm no longer active, so I need to then go like set my active item to null, and then that just is a recursive process the whole way down the 3. Now B had an active item, it's now null, and now it sets it, and it goes down and down and down. And
so we had this nice tidy thing within the list and items kind of subtree, and now we have a breaking thing where you break the encapsulation because A has to communicate with C somehow.
Yes. And the did receive adders thing, it feels like a hack. It feels like I'm now being told, like I'm using state. I'm using like, oh, this thing is now null or this thing has changed to communicate to components below me that they need to change their state.
Right.
And that feels weird. It feels like I should just be able to just pass data down and everything.
It's also weird because those lists have their own state. So like you could say C3 is like C3 being active is like a derived property of like the active path. But if C says like my active item is C2 and now I have an active path that A is telling me, that's where it's kind of like weird. It's like no single source of truth.
Right. And okay, so there's an impossible state here because
exactly.
because of that timeout, the C could be active, but then like a whole nother branch of A could be active.
Yeah, exactly. So then we're like, okay, there needs to be some sort of shared something here. Like there's something that has to be communicated across, but like we don't want to break the encapsulation so much. So then we had this idea of like, yeah, what would the data structure look like? Basically, like these things are related. They're not just like isolated subtrees. Like there is a single tree with a root and it branches off in all these lists, but there's like a single active path through the whole thing. So maybe you just have like an array of IDs, and the index of the element in the active IDs array matches the level of depth of the tree. So if you had a tree of depth 1, then you would just have like A2, and that means like A2 is active. And you can have like A2 comma B1, and that would show you that path through it. Mm-hmm. So then you're like, that's a pretty tidy data structure. And like definitely if every single item got that, it would just be able to tell. You would be able to write that is active property pretty easily, right?
Yep.
And you can think of other data structures that would work for this purpose, but like that's the one that we thought of. Then you're like, okay, this is not bad, but like, how can I make this so like the least amount of knowledge is shared, and like C3 doesn't get this massive thing and has to know about the entire state of the entire tree. Like you want it to be.
We don't want C3 to have a mouse over that says, oh, let me take all of my parents. Let me figure out who all of my parents are, and then set that path to is active. Because now it's like, no, C3 is just some node that's rendered in a tree. It shouldn't know that it came from, B and A.
It shouldn't even know it's a third depth at all.
Yeah.
Right? It should just handle it. And so you think about, let's take the simple case where you've got A and A1, A2, and A3. You hover A3, and there it's like, yeah, it makes sense for A, the list. So we still have two components, a list and an item. It makes sense that the list is going to pass a callback, an action, down to each item on did hover, mouse enter. and mouse enter, the list is going to say, yeah, when you mouse enter A1, set the root active array to like array with A1 in it. Now, let's say A3 renders a sublist of B. So you hover B2. Now, from A's perspective, what do you want to end up with? You want to hover B2 and you want to end up with that array of A3 comma B2. So that's the active path. If B was able to get an action that had A3 already wired in it, then B would be able to invoke the action itself, just like A was itself, with like hovered B2. But then like that A3 is just already there along for the ride. And so B doesn't actually have to care about which parent it's a sublist of. And so once we thought of that, we were like, well, that's currying, right?
Yep. I think this is important. So B is getting an action, and in B's action, it's just going to call it with itself. What did you call it? You call it B2?
Yeah.
I'm having trouble keeping track.
Yeah. B2. Yeah.
So B2, the B2 node is going to get an action that it calls, and it just calls it with itself. I became active. So it doesn't know that it's like a child of A. It doesn't know anything about the state above it. It just knows it's given a function. When it calls that function, it tells it, hey, function, I became active.
Right.
The thing is, when we give that function to B, that A layer is going to like set up a function that's like, when you call this function, you're also going to add A to it.
Right.
And so B is going to invoke this function that's going to add A3.
Right.
And then it's also going to add A2, but B doesn't know.
Right.
B doesn't know. B's just been given a function. And you can imagine, like, this thing can be just infinite depth.
Right.
Yeah. And this is like currying and partial application. So I think partial application is like the term that gets used where you have this function and you're just applying arguments to it without invoking it.
So in the root of A, let's just say, the action is very simple. This dot set active items array of the thing that was hovered. So array A1. So that's it. When you give that to B and B runs it, now you don't want B to run this dot set active items B2, because we just said that like C needs to know if A's active items has changed. So we said, let's just keep the single piece of state, this array of active items at the root. So when B runs, you have this dot set, but with currying, you can bring along this argument from the root. So since the top level list passes in the bound version of this function, the this dot set, the this part is going to always point to A. So it's passing down the curried version. B is going to get it. It's partially applied. It has A3. B is then going to call it with B2. But it's only going to get called once. And this dot set active items equal to all the arguments is now going to have B2 as an arg. It's going to have A1 from the first thing. And this is going to be the root list. So the action gets called once. Now you have two arguments on it. So this way, it's conceptually, it's almost like all these B and C and D lists are just like they're invoking a function. It's just that they're invoking it. They're like sending a message directly to A. In the terminology of object-oriented design, you would be sending a message to like A, because you're like invoking a method on like that version of the list. Mm-hmm. It's just that because you don't actually know that from your perspective, you're just calling that function, and it just happens to be bound to this context of the root node.
Yes. Okay.
So that's why we had to use that action helper again. Like there's one, so this whole thing is like two components and like 8 lines of code. It's awesome. Super awesome. There's one trick that does this currying, which is to, what is it? Do we call it action? Do we pass in this, or do we just pass in the argument?
We pass in this.
Yeah.
So we do action and then we pass in this.
Yeah.
And the idea is that I always get the term, the item nodes.
Right.
Have they always call action set active with this.
Right.
And then they pass that down to their children.
Right.
And their children call action set item with this. But
right.
that set item is they're calling it's a same
pre-wired
set item from above.
Right.
So you can just imagine it as like action action,
Right. Exactly.
set item, this parentheses, this.
Right. So it's like C3 action B2 action A1, and by the time it's on A1,
That's the real
is
action.
the actual root.
Yeah,
and
that is the real action. That's where the real action
Yes,
lives.
exactly. Otherwise, it's just being partially applied until it's actually invoked.
Right. And so that action then gets n arguments.
Right.
And the length, if there's like 4 arguments, you've hovered a node that's
on the 4th depth level.
Yeah, on the 4th level of the tree. It's just one set. And then you set the array and you have...
And then now you have an active array of 4 items. So this is the other trick. You pass that down. So A just needs to look at the first element of the active items array to see each item needs a check. Every item gets an array of active items. And then it says, am I equal to the first one? I'm active. Otherwise, no. And then when I yield a contextual component, I'm going to pass in the active items array, but I'm going to drop the first one because I'm passing you, the second depth level list, all the active items from depth level 2 to n.
Yeah. I feel like this is an optimization. Like we didn't need, we could just say like, is any component in this list, but it's really nice. Like I think you said earlier, if you're the third item,
you're not like,
you're the third node.
Yeah.
You're at the third level of the tree.
Right.
If you're the third item. So
but right now there's nothing in the system that says I'm a third. I know I'm actually on a third level.
Yeah. Because we just,
whereas implicitly, if you gave me an array and I was like checking, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
The IDs weren't unique across the entire tree or something like that.
Yeah. You'd be able to like figure out.
Exactly.
You'd be able to be like, hey, I'm the third in that list.
Yeah.
I'm probably on the third level. Let me do some hacks because I know I'm the third. Yeah, exactly. We just, once A gets that first item, it can drop it. And then B only needs to be concerned with second and onward.
Right.
C, third and onward.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like a purely recursive, very encapsulated thing. There's something else I was going to say about it too.
It reminds me a lot of like these functional, like purely functional data structures.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want to add to that.
Right. So purely functional. I think there's things in JavaScript that make this kind of style of coding like more difficult or not as natural as you would find in something like a Haskell or an Elm. I think the action helper is super powerful here. It does a lot of this stuff for us. And we even talked about how really this is like, I said something like, really what I'm doing here is I'm passing it the update active items action down to the item, the contextual item, and I'm passing it curried with the action helper. What I really want is like to say bind here because this is like more expressive. What I'm really doing is like I'm giving you a bound function, and you're just going to invoke that function, but you're not going to be calling like this dot. Like you're invoking the function that I'm giving you. And you said like you actually can use. I think you can use bind instead of action.
Yeah, we didn't try this, but there is a bind helper.
Yeah.
And what bind can do is bind, I believe, if you have an action on a service, you have a function on a service, and you want to invoke that from a template.
Right.
But you still want like the services,
the context.
You can use bind.
I see.
So I think bind is like a trick for if you wanted to make service actions, because there are some apps where you just want, like you have like a global action, you put it on a service and anything can inject it and invoke it.
Right.
And like bind is like the trick to make that happen. Something I heard Robert say.
Yeah.
So that guy knows where all the bodies are buried.
Yeah. But yeah, it's pretty cool. This as a hidden argument to a function is also like very clear in this conceptualization that we did for this approach that we did. But it's confusing, but it's also like it makes sense once it clicks, but it was also kind of confusing.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever written JavaScript like this. I feel like it's really clever.
Yeah,
I mean, especially when you look at it, and we had so much trouble with all
the other patterns,
and like the Ember concurrency timeout task and all this stuff, and then when you end up with a result that's like 8 lines of code.
Yeah.
It's like everything. It's like 2 components, 2 templates. And it's such small code.
Yeah,
so there's something really nice about it.
There's something really super nice, very elegant about it. Bind is interesting because usually we think about calling .bind. If you've ever written React, if you remember back from the days of jQuery and Backbone, you also had to, Backbone especially had to bind to the on context, and Action does that for us. But bind also does even JavaScript bind. Like under the hood is obviously using JavaScript bind, but it queries arguments too.
Yep.
So it's kind of like does two things. So you think about bind as just preserving to this context, binding to this context. But then if you think about this as a hidden argument to the function, it's like the first argument. It's like the 0th argument to the function.
Yep.
And you can also bring along the first or second or third if you want to.
Isn't there, sorry, I think like Python, like this or self is actually the first argument.
Oh, really?
Function. Yeah, I think.
Oh, interesting.
It might not be. I don't know. I don't know Python.
Yeah.
There's some language.
But I think that's an easier way to think about it.
That's, yeah.
Because usually you're like, oh, it's nice that I can like, I could just pass an action, and I know when I pass this toggle action to a button, like the controller property is what's going to be toggled. But if there was other arguments that made sense to bind to it, you can just do that. You can just do it the same way you would normally do it. You just pass another argument in. So it's like, I think there's some really powerful composition patterns that are unlocked by this. Probably that are, it's hard, it's so abstract and hard to think about. But again, like if you see this code that we wrote and what it enables, it's pretty awesome. So it makes me wonder what else is out there that we haven't worked on.
I think the fact that you can give something a function and you can have other code that's run when they run that function. I mean, this sounds like obvious when I'm saying it, but it's so powerful that at every level that you can then modify that function.
Exactly. And that was a thing. Whereas originally we had the tree, and you think about the tree and then you say like, I hover this guy. And the way you talk about it and what you think about it, you're like, hover this, boom, action up to the top, do some things, data down. Like you could do that. We wanted to end up with a nice kind of recursive encapsulated thing. So now you are really passing the bound function down. But if you look at like the nodes, this guy all have different versions of this. They're just sitting there holding a bound function that's called update active items. And it happens to be bound to different arguments. So if you had like a 3, 3, and 3, there's like 9 versions of that bound function.
Just removing some abstraction there. There's 9 versions of the function, but each function, its arguments have already been set up with the path of that node.
Right.
So node C2 has a function that's preset up with like C2, B2, A1.
Yeah. The function is literally set active items A1, comma B2. It's as if you wrote that for that node because that is the path for that node.
Yep.
So there's 9 people in the tree, and they're all just holding a function that says update A1, B3, C3, and I'm just going to run this if you ever hover me. And so that's like, it's just a different design than we normally think about, where you hover it, you handle the action, you figure a bunch of stuff out, you reset. You just kind of like, you just give them all exactly what they need at the point, at like render time almost.
I mean, the recursion exists inside of the action.
Yes.
Which is not, I think, like coming from like, is not how we usually think of where the recursion is.
Yep. So yeah, pretty cool. We're going to make either a video series or one of our free one-off videos on that, depending on how we want to break that up. I was thinking it actually might be fun to do like a quick version as a free one, just to go through it, but it'll be very confusing. But like a lot of people would be able to watch that and pick something up from it, and then do like a series where you break it down and like explain the action helper more.
I'd watch that.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say about this is like we were still talking about like if you wanted to model this in OOP way, still part of me feels like I'm just not as comfortable with the functional patterns, even though there's part of me that like sees them. Like I do a thing the wrong way, and then I do something like this. I'm like, oh, okay, I can see it, even though I don't have a lot of practice with it. There's part of me that still wishes there was a clean way to do this with like I'm active if I'm hovered or if any of my children are active, and the this.children.filterby is active true. Like I could never really get that working. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. I like that because you can talk about how clever this functional style is, but at the end of the day, if I was going to point at the screen and explain to someone how this would work, I think like the most, like you think about declarativeness, I think the easiest way to declare it is, this node is active if any of its children are active.
Right. And I think we'll come back to that because I think with like the table of contents, we still want to figure out a good pattern for like children registering themselves with a parent, like being able to traverse like your children. Who knows? So pretty interesting though. You've been doing some FastBoot stuff.
Yeah, it's not merged. So I don't know. Is it safe to talk about if it's not merged?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's one thing. There should be like a drinking game for this podcast.
Every time I talk about something,
does Ryan talk about FastBoot?
Yeah,
shot.
True. It'd be a rough night if you've been listening to the episodes over the last few months.
Yeah,
I'll be drinking in solidarity with you and you debugging your FastBoot node code.
Just preparing you for. No, I have like an awesome FastBoot success story where.
Got to highlight those.
Yeah,
few and far between.
So this idea that we have FastBoot and it can generate this HTML for our pages. One of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to start inlining the CSS. So if I have, you give me a URL for an Ember app, I can get the HTML for that. Like that's just the way FastBoot works. And then given that I have the HTML for that and I have the CSS files, it'd be awesome if I could just inline the CSS. And so that way, when on the first render, you don't need to download any CSS files.
So this is inlining the CSS to use on that page.
It's used,
and
on
it's
that
not
page.
The critical, which is what we talked about a few episodes ago, which is like
yeah,
about the viewport.
There's a ton of optimizations you can do here, but for the kinds of sites we build, we're not building like 10,000 pixel height websites with a billion different styles.
Infinite feed. Or
this
whatever.
is something that we would just never ever touch.
Yeah,
too. Like, So another thing here is like in an Ember app, we can cat all of our CSS into two CSS files, app.css and vendor.css. And that has like the whole world. And so with us using like these functional utilities, we end up with pretty big CSS files that aren't used on every page.
Right.
So we want some way to eliminate all that code. So inlining CSS kind of does two things. It eliminates needing to download the CSS file, and then it only includes the CSS on the page. So the only bandwidth that you spend on downloading CSS, it's inline CSS, so it's in the head tag, but it's only CSS that's actually used on that page. So I got this working with FastBoot. I went through a bunch of different inlining libraries, and I ended up one of our subscribers, Drew, pointed me towards, it's like Post CSS, Purge CSS.
Yeah, Purge CSS.
Purge CSS, and they have a great API.
Yep.
It's like HTML and CSS, and it returns you a string of inline CSS. And
oh, cool.
Yeah, super straightforward. So I wrote an express middleware that basically just calls that. It's awesome. So now you visit a page and you get the inline CSS and the FastBoot response. The only problem with this is like each of these steps is kind of slow.
Right.
So the FastBoot can take anywhere from like 1 to 2 seconds to render a page.
Right.
And then the inline CSS can take like another second. So
by the way, I have an open bet with Tom Dale that FastBoot rendering a page will be like, I think it was like under 500 milliseconds or something, or 400 milliseconds at runtime.
It's still too slow.
Or whatever, comparable to...
It's going to be like 100 milliseconds, 60 milliseconds. I mean, think about what's Rails. Rails can do pages in like 30 milliseconds.
With database calls and everything?
Yeah. Database calls, I mean, optimized database calls are like sub-millisecond.
Yeah.
Depending on where the database server is. But
I mean, listen, what is it right now? 800 milliseconds for FastBoot?
Oh, yeah. And it's...
At runtime?
I mean, it's inconsistent.
So 100 milliseconds would be...
Yes.
Phenomenal.
100 milliseconds, I would say we could run FastBoot at runtime.
Without cache.
Yeah. So that's where I'm going with
yeah.
this. So you have this FastBoot is kind of slow, and then CSS inlining is kind of slow.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to cache this. So that's what we do. We throw that stuff in a cache. So the idea is the first web request that comes in, there's no data in the cache. So it kind of has to wait like 3 or 4 seconds for all this stuff to be generated.
Right.
But then once that stuff is generated, then the next web request that comes in can just read right from the cache. then we also, like, our cache system is pretty intelligent. When a database changes, it knows what database models were used to generate that page, because we can look at a JSON API request and we can tell if Ember data fetched this data, we know what models are used. So if those models change or things that could change could be used on this page, we blow that cache entry away.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. The issue here is, like, these things happen a lot. Like these change, even for a small site like ours. Like you do new deployment, you have to blow away the cache. You change
a title.
You change the title of a clip. Now everywhere that clip could be used, we have to blow away the cache.
Right.
If you look at, like, our homepage, there's, like, so many actions that can happen that cause our homepage to be blown away.
Right.
So it turns out, like, the cache actually gets blown away, not like once an hour, but a few times a day. And that means that first request is always going to have to wait like 4 seconds.
Right.
Which is, I mean, it's bad.
Right.
It's something I'm not
going to
roll.
Website.
Yeah.
It's like an app download.
There's another layer here where, like, we figure out what type of user you are and we segment the cache based on that. So, like, subscribers and non-subscribers have different views of the homepage or different views of a series page. So they're going to get, they're going to have different cache buckets. So now, like, a subscriber might come to a page, it might generate the cache, but then when a non-subscriber goes to that page, we can't use what's in the cache. So we have to get a new cache entry back. So there's all these ways, and it turns out we're constantly generating these FastBoot pages, these inline CSS pages. And so we were kind of talking about, like, what is the ideal situation here? Like, what would we want to happen if we could snap our fingers? And the thing that we want is that if you come to a page and it's not in the cache
miss,
it's a cache miss, we can give you what we call, like, the client Ember app. So that's just like the index.html that has just the 2 script tags. The
default way Ember apps are served.
Yeah. And then in the background, and we can give that to you. We can give that to you fast. I mean, that's like it's like 20 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds to serve that.
Right.
Now your client is unfortunately going to have to pay a cost just to render that, to, like, parse all the JavaScript, execute it, boot the Ember app.
So the first render is going to be blocked on all that stuff.
Plus our routes fetch data.
Right.
So some have loading templates, but not all do.
Right.
So it's going to take like 600. I think you just running an Ember app that's like Hello World takes 600 milliseconds. But on top of that, if it's like a data fetching route, it might take a second, 800 milliseconds. So it's not a great experience, but it's still better than waiting for a full
4 seconds in the server.
Yeah. Full 400 milliseconds. Or sorry. Yeah.
4,000.
You can cut that. Still better than waiting for, 4,000 milliseconds. So yeah, that's what I've been working on these last few days. So cache miss, we serve the client app, what I call the client app, and then out of band in the background.
So that's what you didn't explain that yet.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So then we serve the client app.
So that's better than 4,000 milliseconds of waiting.
Right. But we still want, we know this page. There's like this page that exists that people are interested in. So we should probably get it into our cache.
Right.
So then out of band, once the response has been served, in the background, we start generating the FastBoot page. So we kick off a process, it renders the FastBoot page.
As if we were going to serve it to them.
Yeah, as if their request is long and gone.
Yep.
But yes, as if we were going to serve it to them. We generate that, we shove it in the cache. So then the next time a request comes along, guess what? There's a cache entry for that page.
Right.
And we can give it to them. So that it's kind of
the
like
worst case scenario is getting the client app, which is not bad.
Yep. There's actually this is like so complicated. Like, I wish that was the worst case scenario. There's actually a check where if you're a bot, so things like Twitter bot or Slack bot, we don't want you to ever get the client app because we need those bots to have the OG tags.
Right. That's the whole reason FastBoot in the first place.
Yeah. Yep. So you can get the client app if we've basically look at your user agent and say, okay, you can run the client app. But if you're something like Slack bot, we're going to wait 4 seconds because you need to have the FastBoot app. But it's Slack bot. Slackbot isn't going to close the window and go onto another website.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah. So out of band, FastBoot app gets generated, shoved in the cache, and the next request that comes along gets that served from the cache.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then this unlocks, like, there's just so much we can keep piling on here. But now we have a way to generate FastBoot responses out of band from a request. So you can imagine, like, when we start up our app, we generate like the top
homepage.
The top 100 pages. We just create those.
Yep.
So
and you have those requests stored somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So
because you need you want all the information, not necessarily just URL, right? Because again, you need to know session information, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the way we split up our cache, it's like what type of user they are, URL, and then if it's like a FastBoot page or not FastBoot page. For non-FastBoot page, it doesn't matter. It's always the same.
Right. Right.
But for those FastBoot pages, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And it wasn't too bad, that part? You're still right. You still feel like you're in the Wild West because you're just
it's
doing things that make sense.
Being in the Wild West in Node is just unbelievable. You just get to do whatever you want. No, I feel like we're on a good path. I feel like
for every
exactly.
Take a few processing hertz from the user
so our FastBoot takes 8 seconds now because I've started mining Bitcoins. I feel like we got on a good path a few months ago.
Nice.
With kind of figuring out what this architecture is. Basically, once we said we're never going to serve a FastBoot request at runtime.
Yeah. It was a nice constraint to have.
And that's a good target to move towards. So yeah.
Very cool. When are we going to deploy it?
I am writing tests for it now. So this is one thing I actually kind of don't like about Node development is like you kind of have to figure out the test harness and like how to structure all your tests yourself. So in Ember, I create a new acceptance test and I have set up application hooks and boom, I'm off to the races. And
right.
With Node, it's like, oh yeah, I got to use like a fake Redis server. Let me go search NPM for the best fake Redis module.
Yeah, because you're not working in an environment with you don't have like a DI container already.
Oh, yeah. There's just like module. Yeah,
just write a DI container.
Everyone's like, oh, just make a module and you can just import it. And it's like, yeah, it gets you moving quickly. And then like you're just left with a bunch of modules that like no one else is using. It's just you.
Yeah.
So yeah, the testing stuff in Node is great, like Mocha, Chai, async await. Like tests are super easy to write. They're awesome. They don't feel boilerplatey. It's just sort of like setting up the world for testing.
Right.
It's just it's all,
especially with things like Redis and stuff.
Yeah. So I'm figuring that out. I kind of got on a good path again a few months ago, and it's just sort of every time we add something new, it's kind of thinking about how does this get tested.
Yep. Also
too, like a lot of this stuff moves quickly. Like we've changed this stuff a lot over the last year. So I'm not doing like, oh, here are my unit tests.
Right.
Here are my integration tests. Here are my acceptance tests. I'm writing really high level acceptance tests. When I try to get a page that's in the cache, I should actually get that page from the cache.
Yeah.
And not from FastBoot at runtime. And so those high level tests,
they're not right. You're not at a point where they need to influence the design as much, or you're just
because the design
make it work.
Design
first.
is still changing.
Right.
So yeah.
If the tests pass, are you confident that things work? And if not, that's basically your goal, right? To get it to a point where if a test, just like we do with our apps,
yes,
you want the test suite to pass to say, okay, I can deploy master.
I'm not there yet.
Right.
I don't think that Node has like a great
black box E to E.
What you do is like there's like a way you can like test Express apps and like you build a new Express app and register some middleware and send a request to it. But like if you think about like our Ember, like our actual production app,
you need all these pieces together.
It's doing things like it's finding the latest build, it's downloading it.
Yeah.
Because these run on like stateless servers, so it's finding the latest build, it's downloading it, loading that build into memory, serving FastBoot from it. And it's like, you don't want your test harness to do that because then every test is going to take 10 seconds.
Right.
So it's
tricky.
Yeah. It's cool though.
Very cool. Very cool. It'll be nice because when I post something new to the homepage and edit it, I like always open it up in like an incognito browser in the main browser to like force refresh the cache.
Yeah.
So it'll be awesome when we get to a point where that just happens in the background.
Yeah.
And now it should be faster. It actually won't matter. Like, who cares if you get the client app? It's not as bad. It's not as nice as getting the cache page.
Right.
I
think
at least it's not as bad as getting.
Step 1 is getting the client app. Step 2 is regenerating, having the
intelligently
list of,
regenerating.
Having the list of
events.
top 100 pages and regenerating those.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have the newsletter landing page coming out soon. It'd be nice to button that up and launch
the email course.
Email course.
Yeah. Yeah. You designed it in Sketch and I implemented it.
Yeah, we tried it like a real process, you know?
You did it in Sketch.
Like high fidelity in Sketch.
Yeah.
Like pixel perfect, I guess.
Yep. And we spent time
basically
making the changes there.
Right.
Then I implemented it in, handlebars, Ember, Tailwind. It was nice. We already had a bunch of provider components written, so I actually didn't have to write any Ember code.
Any JavaScript?
Yeah, I don't think I wrote any JavaScript for this. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. There's already a provider that said, like, give me a new course sign up and give me an action to save that course sign up. And so in my form, I just said, on submit, provider save action.
Wow.
So it was,
That's awesome.
Pretty cool. One of the things I ran into is that some of the designs, like there's titles, there's like a completely custom hero with like different font sizes, font colors, font weights, sizing, and then there's like paragraphs, and we have like a grid of like sample code from all of
the lessons,
and they have like little accent colors. It looks awesome. They have little accent colors on them. Like that stuff wasn't defined in our Tailwind config. That was just like, making something that looks good in Sketch.
Right.
And then giving it to the developer.
Right.
And so like I went into Tailwind and like anything that needed to be added, I would just add.
Right.
And by the way, Ember CLI Tailwind just is so amazing. Like I just open up a file, add in a new font size, I save it, and it's there.
Yeah, it's cool,
I don't
right?
have to think about anything.
It's cool.
Yeah. I didn't want to like when there were like colors that were added or like font sizes that were added, I didn't really want to like think about these. So if there was like a font size of like, let's say like 48 pixels, I didn't want to be like, this is like our large title font size. So I made the Tailwind, the utility rule, like text dash 48px. This is something I saw Medium does this. I know it's like Medium, like their paddings are like padding dash 15px.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Especially with colors too.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be like, oh, is that orange? No, it's off orange. So I did like the hex rule for that color, or like the CSS, like every color maps to like a CSS color name,
Right.
Or something like that.
Right.
So I did that. Again, I didn't want to think like, oh, that's like off-brand accent.
Because this wasn't a branded part of the site, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
on the one hand it is, but on the other hand it's not.
I just didn't want to think about so to answer that, like, I just didn't want to think about that. I didn't want to think about how this affects other parts of the site.
Because you were taking the design as the kind of the canon, like the truth. And that was the question of how best and fastest to implement the design was like, feeling like thinking about that felt like slowing you down.
There's like a green that's used as an accent color. And our Tailwind config already has a green in it, and they're pretty close. I didn't want to go like find all the places where like the pre-existing green was already used and see like, oh, could I change it?
Was it the green for the sample code?
Yeah, for the sample code.
So that's different. But if there was an accent on the page, then there would be an argument to just use what was, even if I hadn't specified it or something like that.
Well, there's that green bar above the sample code.
Right. But that's like different than like let's say like a blue link or something like that. If there was a blue link.
Yeah.
there's a blue link, you would have been
I
like,
would have just used UI.
so that tells me that's the answer, right? That's like, or at least part of the answer is there.
As I was doing this, I ended up defining a lot. I mean, not like 100, probably like between the color, 20, just right in the Tailwind config. And I was like, I kind of want like some localized tail. I would hate for someone to find like that purple accent color that I used, and then just start using it on another page. Like that's not why I'm adding that as a global role.
Right.
I'm not making this utility to be used anywhere. I'm making it specifically
for this page.
Yeah. And I like that it's a utility because I just get to add it and then use it everywhere I need it.
Right.
And I end up using it and like, well, first of all, I just get to define it as a color. Right. And then Tailwind makes it a text color, a background color, a hover color. It does all these things for me. So just defining that as a color, I then just get to go use it everywhere. So that was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I don't want to write CSS. I don't want to think of all the ways this color can be used. So I like having just the Tailwind thing.
Yep.
But I want it local to this page. I don't want, it's like in the Tailwind conf file, I like put little comments above it. I was like, oh, these things are used on the sign up page.
Right.
Because I didn't want me to discover this 3 months from now and be like, oh, awesome, we have a cool purple.
Right.
Because that's what I don't want.
Right.
I want constraints.
It's interesting. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts there. I think one of them is, even if there's something nice about opening up the colors and seeing all the colors we're using on the site, just seeing all the colors we're using on the site. Like you wouldn't be able to do that if you were defining local colors. And you see things get out of hand. And we still have some refactoring to do there from our Tachyon stage, just because I haven't done it yet. But we have way too many like grays and stuff. So we're just going to clean that up. But it's right there. And you could imagine the tooling making it even more apparent to you, to show you all the different variants of things you're using so you can clean it up.
But that's a job of a designer.
Yeah.
That's it's someone that's been given a design and like, okay, obviously it's more,
there's
I
give and
have
take,
more freedom than this, but like I want
in the same way as a coder, you want to refactor things and share abstractions but there's a process there. Like, how do you notice repeating patterns and then embark on a refactoring that's going to let you share code? Right. There's a process. Right.
And I don't, if I'm delivering a feature this week,
I don't want to worry about that.
I don't want to think like,
for sure,
oh, this is going to be pushed back 3 weeks because I just noticed it.
Right.
I'm going to refactor half the code base.
Right. But later, totally.
And I think this is more, as a developer, I think this is even more like apparent with design, where it's
you have less opinions about, or like you have,
like this thing has been specced out.
Right. You're implementing it.
Yeah. And it's like, and also too, like there's something really nice about us working in Sketch because we can, it's low cost. We're not writing code.
Right.
And we can argue about stuff and move pixels around. And when we're done, like we have something, when we're done with Sketch, we have something that says like, when the code looks like this, when the code can make a website that looks like this, we know we're done with the code.
Right.
And it's like pixel perfect. And there's just no, there's no like, oh, well, I took some freedom here and
right. No, but the thing is though, if you would have just, let's say you just implement that page completely local inline styles or a local style sheet, and it's like, great, there's no constraints at all. But then, 10 months down the road, what does that look like for a site? So
we have 10 pages.
Yeah, and they all have their own CSS, and it's very hard to maintain. You open it up. I mean, I just opened up our modal because I was thinking about making a video about it. Ran into another R&D adventure.
Rabbit hole.
Yeah, and the modal has its own CSS, and now that we're using Tailwind, it even looks like that because it's just, I have to understand everything about it. It's just custom CSS I have to understand from the scratch.
Bro, that modal CSS has been around. That's like 5 years old.
It's from like some old app at TED that I wrote. It really is. And so it works. It's fine. But to change it and update it, don't feel empowered the way you do with cleaner code, the way we're doing CSS. So you want some path there. And there's a lot to talk about here for sure. And we're towards the end of the episode, but I think
don't just dismiss my Tailwind complaints.
Local tailwind is really interesting. There's a thing here where you have like local overrides or something, but it's still like, yeah, you get like the utilities generated for you. You still get the constraints. You're not just right. It's not either global tailwind or local CSS. It's like local tailwind. That's pretty interesting. But you still want some indication. You just don't want anyone to go bananas and do all local tailwind all the time, because then it defeats some of the purpose.
Right. I think the grays, so the gray, like us having like 20 different grays is something that did bite. It's something that did bite us, and it is everywhere on the website.
Yeah. I'm gonna fix it. I promise.
No, but I think that's a good example of what happens when you just let every single page define its own gray.
Totally,
you end up with 20 grays.
That's also what happens if you let any designer design their own pages. And one could argue that the page I designed for this is so one-off because there's some inconsistencies in the branding and the styling and the design of the site that it's actually hard to make a new quote marketing page that adheres to the brand guidelines of the site. If the rest of the site was buttoned up, which is what we're working on, to the point where we felt really good about, you could look at those, what are the typography variables used on the whole site, what are the colors used, and it's actually a very consistent brand. I think you could still make a marketing page that is one-off, but it adheres to those things, and you'd do less of the stuff that you were doing, had to do to implement the design I gave.
I mean, I guess that's true with like the text sizes. You could have like in the design tool, there's no tailwind thing defined for 48 pixels. So like you literally can't make text that's 48 pixels.
Right.
Unless
exactly.
you as a designer say like,
I'm adding this. Also, like the colors, while they're one-off, the colors are still part of our brand in the sense that we use more saturated colors, more vivid and saturated colors. I think MailChimp does now too, but I was going to use them as an example. Old MailChimp had pale colors, less saturated colors. And you would see many different colors on MailChimp's site. Every header would be like an orange or a purple. They almost look like Easter colors. You know how it's like
like pastel.
Yeah, pastel is exactly what I was looking for. So you could make a new marketing site that has new colors, but they still are on brand in the sense that they're not saturated and they're pastel. Whereas the colors we use on this one match the colors we use in our logo. They're very bright and vibrant. So there's still, in my mind, there's still end state where we get to where we have things like a purple defined for you, even if we've never used the purple before, or like the purple that the designer uses is still on brand. And so you shouldn't feel bad about adding it, because if I did want to use a purple accent on another marketing page in a totally different way, it actually should be a similar purple to this.
So purple wasn't bad because there was no other purple defined.
Yeah.
So that just felt like, oh, we're defining this. Yep. I didn't even name it. I didn't even call it purple. I just did
the hex value.
Hex value. No thinking, no abstraction.
Yep.
But like green, there are a few greens defined.
Yeah. So the question there is though, like it still should be the case that there should be a spectrum of greens, like brighter and darker and stuff, but they should be, even if they're used for different things. If it matches the branding, the marketing page, it's because they feel like they're from the same company. Yep. Like you wouldn't, you know what I'm saying?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, right when you said the vibrant colors, it's like, yes.
Right. You could see it. I could have given you a green that would have been like, whoa, what is this? And you wouldn't have just been like, that's going to be my hex value that I add because it feels completely off. Yep.
I probably would have just added.
But you would have questioned the design.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Or
it does feel
we do some cursive typography thing. Oh, that's part of the design now. It's a new font family and it's cursive. You know what I'm saying? And it would have been like, this is weird. So there are things that are one-off that still fit within the design language. And I think it should still be our goal to figure out how to encode that design language as best as possible at a global level. But I think there is something there with the local tailwind stuff is kind of interesting. I don't know what it would look like, but it's interesting for sure.
Can I do one more?
Yes.
One more grievance?
Yes.
Text sizes and measure. So like making sure your container is only like 30 characters or 40 characters or whatever you decide still feels a little hard. Like it's still, right now we have a UIP that takes care of that. It looks at the screen width, figures out the best text size, and then based on that text size, figures out the container width.
Right. So this is intended for body copy. That's like several sentences of text. And as Brian was just saying, it's responsive. So in smaller screens, it's different pixel size, but it has a max width on the paragraph block. And this is for like a block of text.
Yep. So it's awesome with paragraphs.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just drop it in. I think I use this like when I'm creating a page and it's got like, a little intro paragraph. It's like UIP and just don't even think. On this marketing copy page with all the Tailwind stuff, there was like other stuff that probably needed to be the same, but like didn't fit within UIP. So there's like a list with bullets. So does that mean like we created like a UI list or UI UL that then has all that same text size, like responsive text sizing and measuring that UIP has. And then there's like some titles that we have like UI title, but there's some titles that are part of that design that don't match our titles. And it's like, one of the great things about Tailwind is I can just add that title to the page using utility classes. I don't have to abstract it into a component yet. But then I lose like that measure stuff. So there was just this, we had talked about this. One of the solutions we came up with was like a container that can figure out like the size it's supposed to be and yield out a UIP, a UI title, whatever, that has like a measure applied to it.
So the root div would have a max width based on the body copy that's going to be used. And let's say the body copy is medium. It's going to be 30M, basically 30M units. But the body copy being 16 pixels means that's going to be different size than if it was 26 pixels or something. But that way you could that contextual component could yield out a title. So the title is still constrained by the measure for the body copy, which is smaller than what it would be. Because the measure means typographic measure is like you want a max of like 75 characters per line of text for readability. So when your eyes get over here, you see it. Like if you open up, what are some apps? Like Slack doesn't have measure. So like if you have Slack open full width, like someone has a long line of text, you go all the way to the right of your 27-inch screen, and then you have to find the next line, and it's hard. There's some other I don't think Wikipedia has it, and so we always want our text to be measured because it just helps readability. But you want the measure to be determined by the body copy. And so, contextual component, I think it's context, right? It's like, what context are you running this in? And you can have smaller body text. Let's say you have like smaller body text that's small or large. You want the width to be based on that. And you want the titles and the list items and all that stuff to be constrained based on that. So it feels like there's a missing component here. Yeah. That would be a good solution for this.
You want a component that works like UIP, where it can adjust text sizes.
Right.
But instead of actually adjusting text sizes, it like yields out a measure.
Yeah, I was just thinking
given text sizes.
Yeah.
That would normally, that something like UIP would adjust to.
Right, exactly. Yeah, UIP could basically become not concerned with how it's laid out at all. And the parent could always be responsible
for the measure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And it could say, this is medium content. It's like, or large content. And so then when I render a UIP, I'm rendering the large version, which is going to control my size, but then the boundaries are going to be determined by the container. Yeah. I think that'd be a pretty good solution.
It's kind of almost like a renderless component. It's like, give me a building block, give me a large body. And part of that is going to be pre-wiring like a UIP for all that stuff you just mentioned.
Right.
But then you also have kind of like the ingredients that go into that.
Right.
So I would also be able to get the measure out of that. So
right.
if I needed to create my own.
Well, whatever. Like you say, because the hero in the design is based on the measured normal width of a P tag, let's say. And so, but maybe you don't end up actually rendering any normal UIP in that header. You just render like a title and an input form, a sign up form. But you still want it to be lined up, let's just say. So you should be able to do that.
Yeah. Yep.
Without rendering like a random UIP.
Yeah. Yes.
So cool. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm looking forward to having some justified time to spend to do some more cleanup in the front end, which is coming soon for me, just because I know there's still some debt in there from the last 2 years.
I mean, I will say that like style wise, this is still one of the best apps I've ever worked on.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, I don't write CSS.
Yeah.
the site.
I was laughing because I was just seeing people talk like on Twitter about like, I just don't get the utility stuff. For me, I will say the Tailwind stuff is like an intermediate step. Tailwind to me is not the end. To me, there's a future where it's even more constrained. It's more similar to what we would do in Sketch.
Sure.
And you have more constraints there. The long list of classes is annoying, the ugly template. But that's, to me, that's not that's the fact that we're using like the same medium for two things. And we should have like a styling context and a wiring up context or behavior context or whatever. But people on Twitter are saying, I just don't get this, blah, blah, blah. But just eliminating the authoring of CSS.
Well,
every project authors CSS their own way, and this just eliminates that entire.
I don't write CSS, and I think the site looks good. I think the pages that I make look good. Dude, I took a design from Sketch that was awesome.
Yeah.
And implemented it.
Yep.
And I don't write CSS.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy that you didn't have to write any CSS. And I wasn't even thinking about that when I was designing that. That's the other thing. I wasn't thinking about how can I make this design easy to accommodate for the way we write CSS. It wasn't like that at all. I wasn't constrained by that at all. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But I do think there's definitely some ergonomic improvements that we can bring. But yeah, Tailwind's awesome.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to write CSS, lots of opinions. When you use Tailwind, you don't have to care about any of those opinions, whether they're yours or a teammate's, because they just don't come into the picture at all. Cool. So we're going to ship that very soon.
Yep.
That'll be exciting. Nice. So cool. I think that's it for this week. Show notes for this episode can be found on EmberMap.com. And if you want to help others find the show, leave us a rating and review on iTunes. So with that, we'll see you next week.
Bye.